Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I am your host, Byron Pace. It is the 17th of April, 2020. This is a new series, Behind the Lens. We'll periodically be dropping these. At the moment, I'm not quite sure how often, but it's a concept I was eager to explore after a few conversations with friend and incredibly talented photographer, Tito West, who you're actually going to be hearing from in this show. This episode will serve as an introduction, and as we venture to the middle of the show, we will get to the core of what I want these to be about. Take an image, a film, a piece of writing, and speak to the creative about what it took to capture that moment and tell that story. I think it will provide an honest, reflective discussion and present these works in a new light. So without holding you up any further, the first episode of Behind the Lens, I am joined by Tyler Sharp and Tito West. Gentlemen, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It's going to be a short one today because we're going to talk about one thing very specifically, and a very exciting announcement from Modern Huntsman today or yesterday as this podcast goes out, which was the launch of a fine art print shop. Now, we're going to dig into the details of actually curating that with Tito, who's been the mastermind behind it. But Tyler, first of all, why now, and what are you hoping to showcase with this print shop?
Sure. Thanks for the great intro, Byron. I think that we probably discussed this before, that from the beginning, we've always seen Modern Huntsman as beyond a publication, right? There's a lot of opportunities. We've toyed with the filmmaking, and been able to work with you on some of that and some of the panel discussions, but we really wanted to extend this into more of a fine art realm. And we've always wanted to do collaborations with artists and ways to just kind of have different avenues to showcase this amazing work. And personally, I've been wanting to do a print shop on my own, my personal website, for probably 6 years. And for whatever reason, I could never do it.
Probably because you had a million other things on your plate.
Yeah, I don't know. But, this is something that we've always wanted to do. And, we've kicked the idea around, and I feel like I mentioned it to Tito, in the last 2 years. And it just so happened that we were all together in Dallas for Dallas Safari Club. And it was just right time, right place. And, I think that we all had kind of some synergy and started to move the idea forward. And then, of course, with this global slowdown of travel and work, it kind of forced us all into a situation to take action on it. And so, it's a silver lining of the current situation, but we're really excited. And I think that, Tito and I we have such a similar background, not only with growing up in Texas, but also with a lot of the same safari work and photography and film, that he really understands, what I wanted to do with this. And so it made it pretty seamless. And, I was funny because we talked a lot about the process, and then it took me, finally he sent me the link for it, and I went and looked at it and was just completely blown away. It just looks so incredible. He did such an amazing job, and it's really exciting to finally have this live. The nerves are gone, and now we can start to think about all of the amazing things and collaborations and curation of artists and special editions and all that. So yeah, glad to have it out into the world.
And this isn't just people who have contributed to Modern Huntsman, is it? No,
I think that I don't want to take too much away from Tito there, but I think that that's part of what we wanted to do is, yes, the print shop can be an extension of people we've worked with, but it's also a way to showcase people that we feel like just deserve more attention. And hopefully that leads into more working relationships down the road.
Tito, when you're putting together something like this, it's not just about picking pretty pictures. This is also about storytelling through images. Talk me through that process, because you've been sent a lot of images from selected photographers, and then you went through and curated those. I know that just based on the images that I sent you. What was your thought process while you're trying to work out what do you showcase on the print shop now?
Well, I mean, look, there's no formula for how you do this, and photo editing is something that some people are very good at and others struggle with. I mean, I know as a photographer, we're, speaking on behalf of most photographers, we're not traditionally known as good photo editors. For some reason, it seems to not work, both ways. If you're a good photographer, usually you struggle to pick good images, and it's something that I think it just takes a long time to learn, and you have to look at a lot of photographs before you know what a good one is and what a bad one is. And I'm by no means, proclaiming myself as a good photo editor. This was kind of my first experience having to really look at a bunch of people's work and then narrow it down to a pretty curated, pretty small collection based, on all the pictures that I was sent. I had a lot of photographs to go through, but I would say another thing is it's pretty intuitive. If a picture strikes you as something special, then chances are that it's going to strike someone else in a similar way. And so I tried to, at least initially, be really kind of intuitive and just go with my gut. And then from there, I did try to think a little bit about variety and making sure that we had photographs that not only came from different subjects, but that would appeal to different people. Because part of what happens when you look at a photograph is it's not just the photograph having an impact on you, but it's everything that kind of form your own biases, your own opinions, your own personality that you bring to the photograph. So it's really two parts. And I tried to put myself not only in the shoes of the photographer, but in the shoes of our audience, and tried to find a happy medium there where we had, prints that would hopefully appeal to a wide range of people.
I asked you about this the other day, and I was fascinated by your answer. I was struggling to decide on what images to send you, and I said that there was a couple which I personally liked, but I thought, why on earth would anybody want that on their wall? And you kind of opened my mind as to not to think like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to the way that I said I approach this intuitively, and I encouraged, you weren't the only one to reach out with that issue. A lot of people were saying that they were struggling, and I just kind of encouraged them to think about it differently. Stop thinking about, what's going to look good on somebody's wall, or will someone actually want to buy this and put it in their home or their office. When it comes to a print, I think it's more about the emotional impact that it has when you see it. And if it resonates with you and you really are captivated by it, then you're not going to really think about how it's going to look on your wall. You just want to own that photograph. And it just becomes another way of collecting something. And, to me, it's kind of how I've always thought about photography, is that the print is the ultimate version of a photograph. We make selects in Lightroom, or you choose, negatives that stand out on a contact sheet or whatever it might be. And you accumulate a lot of those. But when you print a photograph, you're really saying, like, this is one I want to keep, and this is one that means something to me. So kind of going through the process of selecting prints forces the photographer and the editor to say, which one of these is really the right photograph. But yeah, I think it goes beyond what's on your wall and really boils down to, do you want to own that photograph?
Tyler, just scanning through these here, I think one of the beautiful aspects about the selection that Tito's made here is that it blends so beautifully with the mindset and ethos of what modern huntsman is and has become. Tell me about that in terms of, because this image selection has been, obviously, you have full trust in Tito, but you, at some point, like you said, you looked at it for the first time. That must have been quite striking to you, that there'd been this kind of beautiful synergy of imagery, because like you said, some of these haven't appeared in Modern Huntsman, so it's not like it's even just pulling from a collection of images that you've already pre-selected and have been in print.
Yeah. So I'd like to preface this to say that to qualify Tito, he's come on board with Modern Huntsman as a creative director as well. So he's helping not only curate the shop, but he's helping me and us, really determine who we are and where we want to go and what we stand for and what we don't stand for. And I think that that's one of the things that's really exciting about this is as we're kind of defining, a little bit more of what the path ahead looks like for modern huntsmen and what we feel like we're good at, I feel like one of those main themes that we keep coming back to is kind of the art of hunting, right? Showcasing the art of being in the field. And that's something we're really going to lean into. And Tito can speak a little bit more about this, but, we felt that there really isn't a space in hunting or the outdoor world that kind of finds that interesting crossover between, field photography and hunting, fishing, ranching related work and the fine art world, right? Presenting it in an elevated manner, potentially having gallery exhibitions, doing limited edition books and all that kind of stuff. So that's been really interesting to kind of play with that crossover. And I feel like there's been so many things we've wanted to do in the last 2 years that we just didn't have the time or resources to do. And so for Tito to come in and just smash this first one out of the park, which I feel like really elevated the aesthetic of our website, and I saw it and was like, holy shit. Okay. That's really professional. And it just, I think it kind of gave us all a little bit of a spark to remind us that rather than just be sitting on hard drives for years and being backed up on Dropbox or whatever you're using for archives, that your work can kind of have new life breathed into it. And then also, that part of, and again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I know that we would like to get to a point when people think of the Modern Huntsman Print Shop as an elevated and respected collection of work. And I know that that's something that Tito really wants to work towards. So I think that it's just a really interesting opportunity for us to expand beyond, what we've been doing with the book and the podcast and all of that. And it's definitely created some inspiration.
Tito, we talked about this a little bit on a call. I think it was last week when we were talking about the thought process of images as a photographer. I was actually picking your brain for advice. There are lots of lovely images out there. I mean, Instagram is full of things which look pretty. But what you're doing here is curating art. And I realize that this is a very subjective question, but what are you looking for and to make art rather than just pictures?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's subjective, and I don't want to sound too artsy in my response, but
it's okay. You can be artsy. It's all good. This is a safe space.
We see a lot of images. I mean, God, we see more images today, than most people in the past saw in an entire lifetime. And
true, yeah.
We're totally inundated with it, and there's a lot of really good photography out there, and then at the same time, there's a lot of very cliche imagery. And one of the pitfalls of Instagram is that we're all looking at the same work, and that means that the influences are very similar. So it's very hard for each of us to go out and make, a photograph that stands out among the other ones. And so I guess, what I'm saying is that I'm looking for someone who brings something different to the table, not just for the sake of being different, but when I see a photograph that looks truly authentic, it's because that photograph is really a representation of the photographer that took it. And I'm not really interested in beautiful imagery at all. I used to be, but I'm much more interested, when it comes to photography, but not just photography. I mean, it could be music or literature or film or whatever. I'm much more interested in emotional impact. I want to be gut punched by something I see. I want it to stop me in my tracks. And so that's kind of my criteria for looking at this stuff. And look, it's a huge privilege because the photographers that we, went with in this first round submitted some unbelievable stuff. And we're talking about some very high level people that are really pushing the envelope, really doing some great work. And it makes my job easier. Tyler says he looked at that thing and was blown away by how the print shop came together. Well, I can't take a whole lot of credibility because one, we had great photographers, and two, we had an amazing designer, and those two things really go a long way to making it look like what it is. But just in terms of what I'm looking for, I want to feel something when I see a photograph, and I don't just want to feel it with my eyes. I want to feel it with my heart.
I think that's beautifully put. That's beautifully put, Tito. I tell you what I want to do is, because I mean I feel incredibly fortunate to have a couple of my images included in here. But what I'd like to do is go just pick one or two. Tyler, you have a few images in here, and obviously Tito as well, and just tell me a little bit about them. So I'm the riding the range. This beautiful mirror image with these horses riding across grass and water with mountains in the background. Where did that come from? I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's in your house, isn't it?
Yes.
I think that's when I first saw that picture.
Well, the physical photograph is in my house. That photo was not taken in my house. Let's be clear there.
Yes, sorry.
Yes,
that would be quite the house.
Yeah, that was in just outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a couple of years ago with Chris Douglas, who hopefully you can have on the podcast at some point. But
absolutely,
he had invited me to go down. He had a photo shoot for Double RL, the clothing company that's kind of an offshoot of Ralph Lauren, and it's this very picturesque historic ranch called Diamond Cross Ranch. And those are the Tetons, the Grand Tetons in the background, and they were out that morning corralling all the horses. So yeah, it was a shoot they were doing, but this was actual ranch work that they needed to do. And as they started to come in from the range, I saw them start to come around the side of this lake, and I sprinted probably 300 yards to get to the edge of this water because I saw the mist coming off of it. And then, sat for probably 30 seconds trying to catch my breath and calm down so that I could get a still shot, and just sat there waiting for them to cross into the frame. And it was perfect timing, because not long, you can see a dog in the photo kind of behind the last horse. And shortly after that, the dog went and started drinking the water, which disturbed the reflection. So it was just this perfect, moment for about 10 seconds. And then, the sun kind of broke over the ridge, the fog lifted, and the dog messed up the still water. So it was worth the sprint for sure.
Amazing. Now I'm going to ask you a slightly selfish question, because this is so close to my home. And I was there when you took this image, the stags lying down in the Highlands.
Yeah, that is to me such a special image, because was that my first trip to Scotland, or that was the second trip to Scotland?
I think that was the second one. I think that was the trip where you went stalking as well.
Yeah. So, but let's say that was my first, quote, real trip to Scotland, right? Where I got to experience what Scotland's about, with the shitty weather and the stalking on the hill and a little bit of shooting and stuff like that. So that was such an amazing day for me, getting to speak with the gamekeepers and learn about deer management in Scotland. But then at the end of the day, to find out that there was this collection of stags hanging out in this beautiful glen as we were leaving. I mean, it was literally, we had put our cameras away, and it was just the perfect punctuation mark to the end of that day. And it just, when I look at that image, it just makes me feel, it reminds me of all of those sights and sounds and smells, and just, I feel like I saw the spirit of Scotland that day.
Yeah, and what volume is that article in?
That was in volume 3. Yeah, that was the wildlife management.
Okay.
One. Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's one more before I move on and ask Tito about a couple of his images. Is the elephants? It's a black and white image. Yeah. Is it Ruaha River?
Ruaha River. Yeah.
Ruaha.
So, and I know Tito can relate to this, but that is probably one of the most sentimental images for me. That was my first trip to Tanzania. It was in 2006 when I graduated college and moved to the bush for almost 6 months. And that was, the Ruaha River was the boundary between the Ruaha National Park and what was then called the Usangu Game Reserve, which has now been conceded into the national park. And it was one of those things where we were in the game reserve, and it's amazing how animals are aware of the boundary between areas where hunting is allowed and where they're not. And the elephant in the far left of the picture was the dominant bull. He was kind of tuskless. He had lost his tusk, but he had bullet holes in his ears, and he was super aggressive. He had been charging vehicles in the national park, and they had radioed us, and they had said, listen, if that bull charges you guys, take him out, because he's been, attacking vehicles and charging and harassing people and all of that. So I actually have all this video footage of that bull charging into the middle of the river and smashing his trunk on the water and trumpeting and making a huge scene, but he never crossed the center of the river. He knew that he was still in the national park boundary. So it was kind of like this show, this display of aggression, but within the boundaries of your own front yard kind of thing. And so I don't know, that image to me is just really special because it was kind of my introduction to Africa. And I think that's just an image that, I don't know, to me represents the spirit for sure.
Oh, stunning. I think I'm really, because I didn't know the background of any of these. I'm not asking them just for the benefit of the listeners. I genuinely wanted to know as well. I think this is something that we should do with all of the photographers who are featured here and artists.
Agreed.
Tito, one of the images, now I actually saw this in the flesh when we were at Dallas Safari Club, and you showed a whole heap of prints to Tyler and I. This image from Ethiopia, it's a color film image, and it's got this beautiful texture and color to it. It's looking at the back of somebody's, at their back and head. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's a man from the Morsi tribe in southwest Ethiopia, kind of near the Omo Valley, in the border with South Sudan. And I shot that image, that would have been about a year ago right now, on a safari in Ethiopia. And we were kind of coming and going from camp every day. The rain had gotten so bad that we actually had to leave the vehicle about a mile away and then cross a river by kind of walking over this log that was really precariously balanced over a part of the river. And I had to do it with my pack on every day with all my camera equipment. So we'd cross the river, and then we had to go through a riverine forest just to get to the vehicle. And I had crossed the log one day and barely made it. I had almost fallen off, and I caught myself. I would have gone into the water with all my cameras. And everybody, of course, is watching me, waiting for me to fall in. But I made it across, and it was just it was kind of really overcast, and I think a storm was just about to come on. And the client was actually about to cross the river as well. So I, as soon as I got off the log, I turned around and grabbed my camera, and I was going to capture him coming across. And I saw this guy standing there. And that image only came about because I had limited myself to basically one lens for that entire trip when it came to my stills. And it was a 135. And, it's one of the reasons I like using a fixed lens, because I never would have gotten that if I had a zoom on. It was just kind of, I had to move my feet maybe, 3 or 4 feet to the left. And that was the frame that was presented. And I took it. And it was one of those images that as soon as I took it, I knew it was going to be one that I don't care if anybody else liked. I knew it was for me. I was going to love that image. So I don't typically shoot a lot in color. But when I do, see a photograph in color that works really well, I gravitate towards it. That's probably my favorite color photograph I've ever made.
It blew me away when I remember asking you to pause for a moment when you were flicking through the prints. I mean, it blew me away when I first saw it, and I'm so pleased to see it in this collection. Now, is it Hamar herders? Is that how you say it?
They're the Hamar tribe, yeah.
It is Hamar. Is this the instance where you nearly had a very close call?
Which one are you referring to? The two
a close call involving guns. I don't know if it's this image. I just know that there was goat herders involved. I remember you telling me a while ago.
Yeah, it was those guys actually. Those are the ones that I had a pretty close call with. Again, I had that 135 mil lens on, and I'd seen them coming a long way down along the Omo River, which was right in front of camp, and I had seen the dust from the goat herd. And it was midday. We weren't going to go out for 3 or 4 hours. And I just grabbed my camera and barefoot with a pair of shorts on and nothing else, and was walking from camp. And before I knew it, I was pretty far from camp. Actually, I was really a good ways, but I saw these guys. So I was taking photos of them, and they kind of kept coming closer and closer. And it got to a point where I knew they weren't happy, but they were too close for me to kind of turn around and walk away from. So I had to let them come up to me. And I managed to get them to pose for a few portraits. They were 2 brothers. And, I know absolutely, probably, I don't know, my Amharic is like 2 words. So I couldn't really communicate with them, but I got them to pose for a portrait. And after the portrait, I showed it to them, and they stared at me and no words were said. And then one of them grabbed the camera, which was on a strap on my shoulder, and I kind of pulled back, and it was still on my shoulder, and he started pulling pretty forcefully. And then the brother grabbed it, and they were both pulling me. And this is probably the dumbest thing I've done in a long time. There's a lot of them, but as an immediate reaction, I grabbed his gun that was on his shoulder. So he's holding my strap and I'm holding his strap, and we're just staring at each other in the eyes. And then they started pulling really hard, and I started pulling hard. And then we kind of just froze there, and they let go and I let go. And I took about 2 or 3 more pictures of them. And I thought it might not be the best time to turn my back on them. So I just stood there with a dumb look on my face, wondering if, this was how I was going to go out barefoot and shirtless in Ethiopia. But no, they kind of just, I guess, were equally as dumbfounded, and they turned around and kind of wandered off, and I was able to shoot a few more. But yeah, that was like my 4th day in Ethiopia.
Wasn't it an AK-47?
Yeah, they were both carrying AK-47s. They had tons of ammo strapped on, which the Hamar people are, very well known for. They still, raid neighboring tribes, and livestock, thievery is still a big deal. So that's more what it's for. I don't think that I was in any real danger, but nonetheless, it was kind of one of those things that you look back on and you're like, well, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, it's amazing. I find that when I've been in very remote rural places with people who don't see a lot of sort of outside interactions, especially from the Western world, it's amazing. I'm always amazed, like how happy they are to communicate in however we can communicate, which is normally with hand signals because I can't speak the language, and have photos taken. And just like you do, very often they love having. It's amazing how many people love having their portrait taken, and then you can show it to them. Even if you can't actually speak their language, this sort of conversation through images, I find, is a beautiful bridge. But every now and then, I guess it doesn't go quite right.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm glad that you bring that up because I guess early on in my photography, it's more of a spectacle thing. Like you want to go take pictures of these exotic tribes and these exotic locations because of the wow factor. But I mean, I've been working in Africa for over 12 years now, and it's way beyond a spectacle to me. It's a very deep appreciation and a deep respect for these various tribes. And when I take a photograph of a person like that, it's not to make a spectacle of them or to use their image as some I don't know, means of commercialization. When I get back home, it's like you say, it's my way of going and understanding what's happening there, who these people are, and then I can show them that image, and it becomes a dialogue between two different people who really have no other way to communicate. And I would say 99 times out of 100, when I show them the image, the reaction on their face is priceless, and it does show that it's not just a one-way exchange, that there's mutual benefit for everybody there. So I try not to just take, I try to give something back, because all those images that, I quote unquote take, they're actually given to you. The people present themselves and allow themselves to be photographed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very delicate line to tread as a photographer, because it can sometimes seem, without having a conversation like we've just had, it can from the outside seem exploitative in some respect.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's what
I some people do. There is no doubt there are some people who quite literally go and exploit these situations for their own benefits. And I suppose that goes to almost ethical photography. I mean, that would be a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't pretend to have the answers. I just make it a point to really try to be respectful when I do that. And those guys, even though we had a little bit of an altercation, they were still, I could see the look on their face when they saw their portrait. And, I think
maybe they just wanted to take the portrait home with them. That's why they tried to take the camera.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think they knew exactly how much that camera was worth, probably more than me. But, you got to realize these guys, they don't see images of themselves hardly ever. And we're so used to being able to see pictures of ourselves that the novelty kind of wears off. But imagine if you didn't have mirrors or you didn't have cameras and you never really saw yourself. I mean, that's got to be an incredible feeling to see your image reflected back at you.
Yeah, it would be. And as you thought about that, we're so used to it from our earliest memories. We're used to looking at our reflection, in a crystal clear form, either through mirrors or imagery.
Yeah.
Now, the last photo that I want to ask you about, we could go through all of them, but people can go and enjoy them for themselves. And if maybe we can do this again once more images go up. The Ethiopian cloud forest. It's another color image of yours. It's a very dark image, and it's enchanting.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the Ethiopia was, a place that is just, it's about as picturesque as anywhere I've ever been. And I typically shoot a lot of black and white, and I found myself shooting more color there, especially in the cloud forest, because just like the name implies, I mean, it's almost this mythical place. There's a lot of, moss that hangs off this really kind of dense canopy, but it's a low canopy forest. It's not high canopy like you would picture in a rainforest. And so, I don't know, a lot of people have said it has this Lord of the Rings look to it. And it really is an incredible, incredible place. I mean, if you're there, you wouldn't ever think you were in Africa. It's just totally unlike anywhere else I've ever been on the continent. And so I just found myself, I don't know, wanting to shoot more color because there was an unbelievable green in the forest itself. And then that day, it had been raining a lot, and we came out on a ridge early in the morning. And when the rain cleared, we were kind of looking down on the forest, and the sun was coming up, and it was reflecting off of the fog that was hanging over the forest canopy. And again, same lens, that's actually quite a long lens photograph. I snapped that. I didn't really think anything of it until actually a few months later. It didn't catch my eye in the first round of editing. So, but it's one of my favorite photographs.
Tyler, just to tie this into the conversation that we put out on the podcast a week ago, the print shop is part of some of the funding that's going to be generated from the print shop is part of your initiatives that you launched.
Yeah, so it's a double-edged sword because obviously there's a revenue share with photographers, right? In the same way that a lot of galleries, share sales with photographers. So every photographer who participates in the print shop is benefiting from the sale. But independent from that, yes, anything we are selling right now, whether that's prints, subscriptions, books, we're rolling out a couple of new products in the coming weeks. 10% of that is going to support the medical mask making with Mystery Ranch, and then the other 10% is going towards the funds for freelancers. And we're still working on the details of how people can apply for those freelancer funds and how we're going to allocate that. But we're hoping, I don't know, by next week that we're going to have a little more information about participation and what that looks like. But yeah, so obviously it all goes to a good cause, supporting independent artists and helping, create some relief during this pandemic fiasco. And so, if you were ever on the fence, we've all have empty walls in our house. It'd be like, oh, it'd be nice if we, made that look like, an interior decorator came in here or had a fine art print or something like that. Then this seems like a pretty good time now that we're all stuck at home. And then, the added benefit of helping some relief efforts helps too.
Fantastic. Well, Jens, is there anything else you want to add to this before we bring this conversation to a close?
I'm good. Tito, do you have anything?
No, I mean, I was just going to kind of follow up on you. I mean, saying it's a good time to get something on the wall. I mean, I think when you buy a print, you're making a pretty loud statement that, this is something I want to own. And it really does go beyond just decorating. I think it's really important that, at least for me, I've found when it comes to buying prints, it kind of starts slowly. You ask yourself, do you really want to spend that much money on a print? But I've been collecting prints for a long time now from various photographers, and it kind of becomes this addiction. And once you start it, it kind of keeps going. And basically what you're saying is that, you're surrounding yourself with these things that have a really deep impact on you. And when you walk by that print every day and you see that, it reminds you of the reason you bought it. It reminds you of something bigger that's out there. So right now, while we're all stuck at home, to have something that constantly reminds you of the natural world or the bigger world that's waiting out there for you when all this is over, I think it's really incredible. I love having the prints exist in the book form. That's amazing because you can pick it up and you can go through it at any time. But those prints live inside the book, and when you put it back, they're in there. And when you put it on the wall, it's different because you see it all the time. So if you're just getting into collecting prints or you're just starting to think about it, I encourage you to start small. Buy a small one, have it framed, put it up on the wall, and see what a difference it makes. Because I promise you, it will have an impact on your life, and it'll make a big difference in your daily surroundings.
I think with the birds singing in the background, as you brought that to a close, I couldn't think of a better way to finish.
I know.
So, Tyler, Tito, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I think people are. I would hope by the time they get to the end of this podcast, they'll already be bringing up the Modern Huntsman print shop in their browser, even if it's just out of curiosity to see what's there and what's being curated, because it's inspiring. I think it truly is. There's some amazing photographers on there. So thanks very much for your time, guys, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Byron.
Thanks, Byron.
Thanks very much for joining us. Listen in next time when we take a walk once again into the wilderness.